The night the storm came to the outskirts of Ironvale District, it brought with it a cold so bitter that even the hardened steel walls of the industrial garages seemed to groan under its weight, and the streets, usually alive with the distant hum of engines and neon flickers, fell into a hollow silence broken only by the howl of freezing winds. Snow, rare for that region, fell in uneven sheets, gathering along rusted pipes, broken signage, and the cracked pavement that led to one of the oldest repair garages still standing at the edge of the district. Inside that dimly lit space, surrounded by half-disassembled machines and the lingering scent of oil and metal, worked a quiet human mechanic named Elias Rowan, a man known not for his strength or status, but for his patience. He fixed things others gave up on: old engines, broken drones, discarded systems that no one believed were worth saving. It was perhaps no surprise that on that particular night, something equally forgotten would find its way to his door. At first, Elias barely heard it. A faint scratching, almost lost beneath the rattling of the storm against the metal walls. He paused, wrench still in hand, listening carefully. The sound came again, weak, uneven, desperate. Frowning, he set his tools aside and moved toward the garage entrance, where the heavy sliding door was only partially shut to keep out the worst of the wind. Probably just debris, he muttered to himself, though something about the sound didn't quite fit. When he reached the door and pulled it open just a little more, a gust of freezing air burst inside, carrying with it a swirl of snow, and something small, dark, and trembling collapsed just over the threshold. Elias froze. At his feet, barely moving, was a dragon hatchling. It was smaller than any he had ever seen, its body thin, its scales dulled and cracked from exposure, their faint blue tint barely visible beneath layers of frost. Its wings were curled tightly around itself, but even that did little to protect it from the cold. One of its tiny legs dragged uselessly behind it, as though injured, and its breathing came in shallow, fragile bursts. It must have crawled through the storm, for who knew how long, just to reach the faint warmth of the garage. Elias's mind raced. Dragons were not common in this district, especially not hatchlings, and certainly not alone. Where had it come from? Where were its kin? Questions flooded his thoughts, but they were quickly pushed aside by something far more immediate. The creature was dying. The hatchling let out a faint, broken sound, more breath than voice, and tried to move forward, but its strength failed it. It collapsed fully onto the cold concrete floor, its small body shivering violently. Elias didn't think anymore. He dropped to his knees beside it, ignoring the cold seeping through his clothes, and carefully reached out. The hatchling flinched weakly at his touch, its body tensing in fear, its eyes barely opening to reveal a dull, glassy gaze filled with exhaustion and pain. Hey, it's all right," Elias said softly, his voice calm despite the shock still lingering in his chest. He moved slowly, deliberately, making sure his movements were gentle, non-threatening. "You made it this far. That's good. You're okay." The hatchling didn't understand his words, but it seemed to react to his tone. Its trembling lessened slightly, though its breathing remained shallow. Elias carefully slid his hands beneath its fragile body, lifting it with the kind of care one would use for something far more delicate than its draconic form suggested. It was lighter than he expected, far too light. He could feel the cold radiating from it, deep and dangerous, its body temperature far below what it should have been. Without hesitation, he carried it inside, away from the open door, and kicked the entrance shut behind him, sealing out the storm. "Let's get you warmed up," he murmured, already moving toward the back of the garage where an old heating unit hummed quietly. He cleared a space quickly, pushing aside tools and scrap, and grabbed a thick cloth from a nearby shelf, wrapping the hatchling carefully to trap what little warmth it had left. The creature let out a weak chirp, its eyes fluttering again as if struggling to stay conscious. Elias's jaw tightened. "Stay with me, all right? Don't give up now." He adjusted the heater, increasing the output despite knowing it would strain the old system, and positioned the hatchling nearby, not too close, careful not to shock its system with sudden heat, but close enough to begin raising its temperature slowly. He knelt beside it, one hand resting gently against its side, feeling the uneven rhythm of its breathing. He had no formal training with dragons, but he knew enough about living creatures to understand the basics: warmth, stability, time. That was what it needed. Minutes passed, then more, the storm continuing to rage outside while inside the garage a different kind of battle was being fought. The hatchling's shivering gradually lessened, its breathing becoming slightly more regular, though still weak. Elias didn't move from its side, his focus unwavering. Occasionally, he would adjust the cloth, or check its injured leg, or simply speak in that same calm, steady voice, even if the creature couldn't understand the words. "You're doing good. Yeah, that's it. Just breathe. You're safe now." The words came naturally, without thought, but they seemed to carry weight. At some point, the hatchling's eyes opened again, this time clearer, more focused. They were a deep, luminous blue, faintly glowing even in the dim light of the garage. They locked onto Elias, studying him with a quiet intensity that felt far too aware for such a small creature. Elias paused, meeting its gaze. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, the hatchling shifted, inching closer to his hand, its small head pressing weakly against his palm. Elias exhaled softly, relief easing the tension in his chest. "Yeah, that's better," he said gently, his thumb brushing lightly along the side of its head. "You're gonna be all right." Outside, the storm howled louder, wind slamming against the metal walls, but inside the garage, a fragile calm had taken hold. The hatchling, though still weak, had stopped shivering entirely now, its breathing steady enough to no longer sound like it might stop at any moment. It remained pressed against Elias, drawing warmth not just from the heater, but from his presence. Neither of them noticed, at first, the shadow that passed briefly over the garage roof. High above the storm, something vast moved through the dark sky, its form barely visible against the swirling clouds. Circled once, then again, slower this time, as if searching. A low, distant rumble echoed across the horizon, lost beneath the roar of the wind. Back inside, Elias leaned back slightly, allowing himself a moment to breathe as the immediate danger seemed to pass. He glanced down at the hatchling, now resting more peacefully, its small body rising and falling in a steady rhythm. "You picked one hell of a night to go wandering," he muttered softly, a faint, tired smile touching his face. "Good thing you found this place." The hatchling made a soft sound in its sleep, curling slightly closer to him. Elias shook his head lightly, reaching for another cloth to place over it, making sure it stayed warm. He didn't know where it had come from, didn't know what would happen when it recovered, didn't know if someone, or something, would come looking for it. But none of that mattered right now. Right now it was here, and it was safe. Dragon. The storm did not ease as the night deepened. It grew harsher, angrier, as though the sky itself was searching for something it had lost. And inside the small garage at the edge of Ironvale District, Elias Rowan remained seated on the cold concrete floor beside the fragile life he had pulled from the snow, his back resting against a rusted workbench while the heater hummed steadily nearby, pushing back the freezing air inch by inch. The dragon hatchling slept at first, its breathing slow but no longer fragile, its small body finally beginning to regain warmth beneath the layers of cloth Elias had wrapped around it. But the deeper the night stretched, the more restless it became. Soft, uneasy sounds escaped it. Tiny whimpers, faint chirps that carried traces of fear even in sleep, and each time, Elias would shift slightly, placing a steady hand against its side, grounding it without fully waking it. "Easy, you're all right," he would murmur quietly, his voice low and calm, a constant presence in the dimly lit space. He didn't know if the creature understood him, but it seemed to settle every time he spoke, as if the sound itself was enough to anchor it. Hours passed like that, marked only by the distant thunder of the storm and the quiet rhythm of the hatchling's recovery, until finally its eyes opened again. Fully this time. The deep blue glow within them was clearer now, brighter, no longer dulled by exhaustion. It blinked slowly, adjusting to the warmth and light, its gaze shifting until it found Elias sitting beside it. For a moment, it froze, its small body tensing instinctively, wings twitching as though preparing to flee, but the movement faltered almost immediately, its strength still not fully returned. Elias noticed the change instantly and lifted his hands slightly. Not touching, just enough to show he wasn't a threat. "Hey, it's okay," he said softly, his tone unchanged from before, steady and patient. "You're safe here, remember?" The hatchling studied him, its head tilting ever so slightly as if trying to understand. Its breathing quickened for a second, but then it stilled again, something in Elias's voice, or perhaps his stillness, easing the instinctive panic. Slowly, cautiously, it shifted, testing its limbs. One of its legs trembled as it tried to push itself up, the injured one dragging slightly behind. It let out a small, frustrated chirp, the sound sharper this time. Elias frowned, leaning forward just enough to observe without crowding it. "Yeah, that's not going to feel great yet," he murmured. "You've been through a lot." The hatchling didn't give up. It tried again, this time managing to lift its body slightly off the ground before wobbling and nearly collapsing. Instinctively, Elias moved, his hands catching it gently before it hit the floor. The moment he touched it, the hatchling stiffened, a faint hiss escaping its throat. Not aggressive, but defensive, reflexive. Elias didn't pull away, but he didn't tighten his grip either. He simply held it steady, his touch firm but careful. "I've got you," he said quietly. "Not gonna hurt you." For a few tense seconds, the hatchling remained rigid, its eyes locked onto him, searching, uncertain. Then slowly the tension eased. Its body relaxed just enough to stop resisting, its head lowering slightly as if accepting the support. Elias exhaled softly, relieved, and gently guided it back down onto the cloth, making sure it was comfortable. "There we go, take it slow," he added. The hatchling remained still for a moment, then did something unexpected. It shifted closer. Not much, just a small movement, but deliberate. Its body leaned lightly against Elias's hand, its head lowering until it rested near his wrist. The contact was brief at first, hesitant, as if testing whether it would be pushed away. But when Elias didn't move, it stayed. Outside, the storm roared louder, a sudden gust slamming against the garage door with enough force to rattle the entire structure. The hatchling flinched violently at the sound, its wings snapping open in panic as it scrambled awkwardly, trying to retreat. Its injured leg gave out beneath it, and it let out a sharp cry, fear flooding its movements. Elias reacted instantly, shifting closer, his voice firm but calm. Hey, easy. It's just the storm," he said, reaching out again, slower this time, letting the hatchling see his hand before he touched it. "You're inside. Nothing's getting to you here." The hatchling's breathing was rapid now, its eyes wide, glowing brighter with distress. It backed itself into the corner of the cloth, wings partially spread in a weak attempt to appear larger, though the effect was more heartbreaking than intimidating. Elias didn't rush it. He stayed where he was, lowering himself slightly so he didn't tower over it, his posture relaxed. "I know. It's loud," he continued softly. "But you made it through worse than this, didn't you?" The words meant nothing in language, but the tone, the rhythm, they mattered. Slowly, the hatchling's frantic movements began to slow. Its wings lowered a fraction, its breathing still uneven but no longer spiraling. Elias waited a few more seconds, then carefully reached out again, placing his hand gently on the ground between them rather than directly on the creature. "Come on. You're all right," he murmured. Another crash of thunder echoed outside, but this time, the hatchling didn't bolt. Instead, it hesitated. Then, inch by inch, it moved forward. Its nose brushed against Elias's fingers first, a light, cautious touch, as if confirming he was real, that he was safe. When he didn't react negatively, it stepped closer, pressing its head lightly against his hand once more. This time without pulling away. Elias allowed himself a small, tired smile. "There you go," he whispered. Time passed again, quieter now despite the storm's continued fury. The hatchling remained close, no longer retreating at every sound, its trust, fragile but growing, anchored by Elias's steady presence. He adjusted its wrapping again, checked its injured leg more carefully this time, noticing swelling but no visible break. "We'll fix that up soon," he said softly. "Just need a bit more strength in you first." Then, just as the night seemed to settle into a fragile rhythm, something changed. The hatchling's head lifted suddenly, its body going still, not in fear this time but in alertness. Its eyes turned toward the garage door, the blue glow within them intensifying. A low, unfamiliar sound escaped it. Not a chirp, not a whimper, but something deeper, instinctive. Elias frowned, following its gaze. At first, he heard nothing beyond the storm. But then, beneath the wind, beneath the distant thunder, there was something else. A low, distant rumble. Too deep, too steady to be part of the weather. The hatchling shifted closer to him, pressing firmly against his side now, not out of fear alone, but something more complex. Recognition. The rumble came again, closer this time, and somewhere beyond the storm, something massive was searching. Dragon. The rumble beyond the storm did not fade. Instead, it grew, rolling through the frozen night with a depth that no natural thunder could match. And inside the garage, Elias Rowan felt it in his chest before he fully heard it. A vibration that seemed to hum through the metal walls and into the bones of the building itself. The hatchling pressed tightly against his side now, no longer trembling from the cold but from something far more instinctive. Its small body tense, its glowing blue eyes fixed on the closed garage door as if it could see through the steel. Another rumble followed, louder this time, and with it came a shift in the air outside. The storm winds bending unnaturally, snow swirling in wide arcs as though something immense was moving through it. Elias slowly stood, his instincts sharpening despite the uncertainty of what he was about to face. He didn't move away from the hatchling. Instead, he stepped slightly in front of it, not as a conscious decision, but as something automatic, protective. "Stay behind me," he muttered quietly, even though he knew the creature wouldn't understand the words. The garage lights flickered once, twice, then steadied again, casting long shadows across the scattered tools and machinery. The rumble came again, closer now, so close that the metal door rattled violently in its frame, snow shaking loose from its edges. Elias swallowed, his gaze fixed on the entrance, his mind racing through possibilities, none of them reassuring. He had no weapons, no defenses beyond the walls of the garage and whatever courage he could muster. But even as fear crept in, he didn't step back. The hatchling let out a low, uncertain sound behind him, and he felt it brush against his leg, as if seeking reassurance. Without looking down, he reached back slightly, his hand resting gently against its head. "It's all right," he said softly, his voice steady despite everything. "I'm here." Then the storm outside parted. There was no explosion, no sudden impact, just a shift, as if the world itself had made space. The howling wind dropped into a strange, heavy silence, snow no longer slamming against the walls but drifting slowly, almost reverently. And through that quiet, a shadow fell across the garage, vast and unmistakable. Elias's breath caught as a massive shape moved just beyond the door, its presence so immense that it seemed to blot out everything else. The hatchling let out a sharp chirp, loud, clear, and filled with recognition. The door did not burst open. Instead, something tapped against it, once slow and deliberate, the sound of something enormous making contact with fragile human-made steel. The entire frame groaned under the pressure. Elias stood frozen for half a second, then forced himself to move. His hand tightened slightly against the hatchling as he stepped forward, each movement cautious but determined. "If that's what I think it is," he whispered under his breath, though he didn't finish the thought. He reached the door and hesitated, his hand hovering over the control switch. Every instinct screamed at him to stop, to not open that barrier, to not invite whatever was out there inside. But behind him, the hatchling shifted again, pressing forward slightly, its earlier fear replaced by something urgent, something that felt almost like hope. Elias closed his eyes briefly, then exhaled. "All right, let's see," he murmured and pressed the switch. The garage door lifted slowly, inch by inch, metal scraping against its tracks as cold air rushed inside. Snow drifted across the threshold, and for a moment, All Elias could see was the swirling white of the storm's edge. Then, as the door rose higher, the shape beyond became clear. A dragon. Not a hatchling, not even close. This one was enormous, its body stretching far beyond the width of the garage. Its scales a deep, shimmering blue that caught the faint light and reflected it like frozen stars. Its wings were partially folded, but even so, they extended outward with a span that could have covered the entire structure. Its eyes, glowing with the same luminous blue as the hatchlings, locked instantly onto Elias. The air seemed to freeze. Elias stood there, completely still, aware on some deep, instinctive level that any sudden movement could mean disaster. The dragon lowered its head slightly, bringing its massive gaze closer to the level of the garage entrance. Snow drifted around it, untouched by the wind now, as though the storm itself had paused in its presence. Behind Elias, the hatchling let out a bright, unmistakable chirp. The sound cut through the silence like a spark. The great dragon's attention shifted instantly, its head tilting just enough to look past Elias and into the garage. Its eyes widened, not in aggression, but in something far more powerful. Recognition. The hatchling didn't hesitate. Despite its injured leg, it pushed forward, slipping past Elias and limping toward the open doorway. "Hey, wait!" Elias said instinctively, reaching out, but he stopped himself halfway, his hand lowering as he realized what was happening. The hatchling reached the threshold and let out another chirp, louder this time, its wings fluttering weakly. The great dragon responded immediately, lowering its head further, its massive snout coming down to meet the small creature. The moment their scales touched, a deep, resonant sound filled the air. Not a roar, not a growl, but something that vibrated with emotion so strong it was almost tangible. Elias felt it in his chest again, stronger this time. The hatchling pressed itself against the larger dragon, its earlier fear completely gone, replaced by relief so intense it was almost overwhelming to witness. The great dragon remained perfectly still, allowing the contact, its massive presence radiating something protective, something fierce and ancient. For a few long seconds, Elias simply watched, his breath slow, his mind struggling to process the magnitude of what he was seeing. Then the dragon's gaze shifted back to him. Slowly, deliberately, the moment its eyes met his, Elias felt a different kind of weight settle over him. Not fear exactly, but awareness. This creature knew. It understood. It had followed the trail of its lost hatchling through the storm, through the freezing night, and now it stood here, looking at the human who had taken it in. Elias swallowed, his hands lowering to his sides, his posture open, non-threatening. "I found it outside," he said quietly, his voice steady despite the enormity of the situation. "It was freezing. I just helped." The dragon did not move. It simply watched him, its gaze unblinking, ancient, measuring. The hatchling chirped again and turned its head back toward Elias, as if including him in the moment, as if acknowledging his place in what had happened. Another long silence passed. Then, slowly, carefully, the great dragon shifted its weight and lowered itself further, its massive body settling into the snow just outside the garage. The movement was controlled, deliberate, a gesture that spoke not of aggression, but of restraint. Its wings folded tighter against its body, its head lowering once more, this time not just to its hatchling, but toward Elias. It stopped just short of the threshold, close enough that Elias could feel the warmth of its breath even through the cold air. And then it exhaled. The breath that washed over him was warm, carrying a faint glow, not burning, not harmful, just enough to push back the cold and fill the space with a gentle heat. Elias blinked in surprise, the sensation unexpected, almost soothing. The hatchling chirped happily, pressing closer to the larger dragon, then glancing back at Elias once more. The message was clear. This was not a threat. This was something else entirely. And for the first time since the storm had begun, Elias allowed himself to fully breathe again, standing at the edge of his small garage, face to face with a creature of immense power, and realizing that, somehow, he had just become part of its story. Dragon. The storm did not return after that moment. It simply stayed away, as though the presence of the great blue dragon had claimed the night and silenced the chaos that once ruled it, leaving the world around Elias Rowan's small garage wrapped in a quiet so profound it felt almost unreal, and for a long time no one moved. Elias stood at the threshold, the cold air brushing lightly against his face, yet no longer biting, no longer threatening, while just a few steps beyond him the massive dragon remained lowered, its glowing eyes steady, its immense form radiating a calm authority that held the world in place. The hatchling pressed close to its parent, chirping softly, its earlier fear completely replaced by relief and a kind of innocent excitement. But it did not forget Elias, not for a second. Every few moments, it turned its small head back toward him, its bright gaze searching, as if ensuring he was still there, still real. Elias swallowed, his heart still beating harder than usual, but the fear that had gripped him earlier had changed into something else, something quieter, steadier. Respect, perhaps, or understanding. He stepped forward. It wasn't a bold movement, not dramatic or fearless, just a single careful step across the threshold of his garage, into the cold, into the presence of something far greater than himself. The snow crunched softly beneath his boots as he moved closer, stopping a few feet away from the dragon's lowered head. Up close, the sheer scale of the creature was overwhelming every detail, from the intricate patterns along its scales to the slow, controlled rhythm of its breathing, speaking of power held in perfect restraint. Elias raised his hand slightly, not reaching out fully, just enough to show intention. "It's okay now," he said quietly, his voice carrying easily in the still air. "It made it." The dragon's eyes shifted, focusing more intently on him. For a brief moment, nothing happened, and Elias felt that same weight again. That sense of being seen not just physically, but completely, as though every thought, every intention was laid bare before an ancient mind. Then the dragon moved. Slowly, deliberately, it extended its head just a little closer, closing the gap between them. The warmth of its breath brushed against Elias again, stronger this time, and though his instincts urged caution, he didn't step back. Instead, he let his hand move forward the rest of the way. His fingers touched the dragon's scales. The contact was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Not rough, not smooth, but something in between, alive with a faint energy that seemed to hum beneath the surface. A subtle warmth spread through his hand, not heat in the usual sense, but something deeper, something that resonated through him in a way he couldn't explain. He held his breath for a second, then exhaled slowly, his tension easing as the dragon did not react with aggression, did not pull away. It simply remained there, allowing the contact, acknowledging it. Behind the dragon's massive form, the horizon began to lighten slightly, the first hints of dawn pushing through the heavy clouds. The world was waking, but this moment felt untouched by time. The hatchling let out a bright chirp and scampered, still a little clumsy, back toward Elias, brushing against his leg before turning and hopping up against its parent again, as if trying to bridge the space between them. Elias let out a quiet, almost disbelieving breath. "You're gonna be trouble, aren't you?" he murmured softly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. The great dragon shifted slightly, lifting its head just enough to look down at the hatchling, then back at Elias. There was something unmistakable in its gaze now. Not just awareness, not just understanding, but something closer to acknowledgement. It had seen what he had done. It had followed the trail through the storm, found its child alive when it should not have been, and now it stood here, choosing not to destroy, not to threaten, but to recognize. Then, in a motion so controlled and deliberate that it seemed almost ceremonial, the dragon lowered its head further, lower than before, until the tip of its snout nearly touched the ground in front of Elias. Elias blinked, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. This was not a defensive posture, not a hunting stance. It was something else entirely. The air seemed to grow heavier with meaning, the silence deepening as if the world itself understood the significance of what was happening. The hatchling chirped loudly, almost proudly, circling once before settling beside its parent's lowered head, its gaze flicking between the two of them. Elias hesitated. Don't know what that means, he admitted quietly, almost to himself. But even as he said it, something inside him did understand. Not in words, not in logic, but in instinct. This was not submission. It was not weakness. It was something earned. Slowly, cautiously, he stepped closer. His hand lifted again, and this time when he placed it against the dragon's snout, he did so with a steadiness that hadn't been there before. The moment his hand made contact, that same warmth surged again. Stronger now, clearer. It moved through him like a quiet current, carrying with it impressions rather than thoughts. Vast skies, endless distances, the feeling of flight, of watching over, of enduring through ages beyond human comprehension. It was not overwhelming, not painful, it was shared. Elias closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself, then opened them again. "You were looking for it?" he said softly. His voice filled with a quiet certainty now. "You didn't stop." The dragon remained still, but something in its gaze shifted, something that felt like agreement. The hatchling chirped again, pressing against Elias's leg, then nudging his hand as if urging him to keep it where it was. He let out a faint, almost incredulous laugh. All right," he murmured. "I'm not going anywhere." For a few more moments, the three of them remained like that: human, hatchling, and ancient dragon, connected in a way that defied everything Elias thought he understood about the world. Then, slowly, the dragon lifted its head. The movement was graceful, powerful, its wings beginning to unfold slightly as it prepared to leave. The hatchling hesitated for just a second, looking between Elias and its parent, then bounded lightly back toward the larger dragon, though it paused once more, turning its head toward Elias with a final soft chirp. Elias crouched slightly, meeting its gaze. "Go on," he said gently. "You're home now." The hatchling held his gaze for a second longer, then turned and climbed up onto its parent's lowered limb, settling against it. The great dragon looked at Elias one last time, its eyes steady, unwavering. There were no words, no gestures beyond that look, but it was enough. Then, with a powerful motion, it spread its wings fully. The air shifted instantly, snow lifting in a wide spiral as the dragon pushed off the ground, rising into the sky with a force that sent a rush of wind through the open garage. Elias stepped back slightly, shielding his face as the massive form ascended. The hatchling held securely against it. Within seconds, they were above the rooftops, then higher still, their silhouettes cutting across the early light of dawn before disappearing into the clouds. Silence followed. The storm was gone. The sky was clearing, and Elias stood alone at the edge of his garage, the cold no longer biting, the quiet no longer empty. He looked down at his hand, still faintly warm, and let out a slow breath. "Yeah," he muttered softly. "Guess you were safe." But deep down, he knew something more had happened. He hadn't just given shelter. He had been trusted. And somewhere out there, beyond the clouds, a dragon would remember that. Dragon,